Hey everybody, my name is Dave House. This talk is called Industrial Design Systems, which I named before I wrote the talk. So we'll see where that goes. I work on Constellation, a multi-brand design system for Lloyds Banking Group, primarily supporting Lloyds Bank, Halifax, Bank of Scotland and MBNA, but potentially a lot more in the future. And I think there's some Lloyds people in, so shout out. I was also on a design system team at BT Group, which at the time was a multi-brand, multi-platform system for BT, EE and PlusNet. I think there's some BT people in tonight. And prior to all of that, Government Digital Service, where I was on the founding team of the Gov.uk design system, much like the first half of this talk. So although I'll touch on this work occasionally, this isn't really what I'm going to be talking about today. This talk is about how design system teams often struggle to define and effectively communicate the boundaries of their work, specifically around their relationship with brand and design language. I found some help creating these boundaries in a somewhat unlikely place, under a classic VW camper van. There I am trying to undo yet another rusted bolt. But before we talk about that, let's take a little step back. I believe digital design has gone through its own hyperlocal industrial revolution. Fundamentally, the way we make digital products has changed. When you look at the pillars often associated with an industrial revolution, standardization, modularization, scalability, and automation, they can all somewhat be aligned with the goals of a design system team. Whether or not you think this is a good thing depends on who you're asking. While we generally consider the work we do on design systems to be positive, the industrialization of design has created yet another crack in an already fractured industry. It's one of the reasons we hear comments and debates on one side like all websites look the same now, or we've lost our craft, or you just don't understand the cascade in CSS. And in return we hear comments like, this website is actually 947 independent applications. Our priority is functionality and accessibility and not highly bespoke visual or graphic design. And probably most commonly, this just isn't maintainable at our scale. Others have gone a little further with comments like, the industrialization of digital design is the single worst thing to happen to our discipline. It's the end-of-level boss, right there. The fact is, all of these opinions are valid and they all matter to someone. Our roles as designers or developers have gone in such different directions in the last decade. While we all have a lot of things in common, the same role on paper from one large organization to the next, a startup or a consultancy or an agency, may be a completely different job day to day. We also work on things that our users feel completely different about. Some of us work on what I consider to be have-to type experiences, e.g., I have to do this, I want to get it over with. Others work on want-to experiences, the type of thing that users want to and enjoy interacting with because it means something to their lives. Which is why when you create a design system, the boundaries you impose on it should be informed by the organization you're in or the type of product you provide, and not what you think a design system should be or do. Don't stress out if sometimes it feels like you're going in a slightly different direction to other design systems. Because a design system for 30 users should be different from one for 3,000. A design system for a single native app is a very different thing to one that supports 500 independently released web apps. A design system for a fashion brand should be different to one for an electricity provider. To sum this up with a quote, you can't be doing arts and crafts in a factory. And although that quote was by me, just now, I think it illustrates the point I'm trying to make. You need to understand how people feel about your organization. Are they using your website or app because they want to be? Are they here because they have to be? In reality, do they even know or care what website they're on? You also have to understand the internal workings of your organization. Are you in a place that values highly bespoke, unique experiences, or does it actually align with more of an industrialized approach? The question I asked myself was, what do I think about the industrialization of design, and how can we scope the work we do to avoid the pitfalls of it? Well, let me talk at you about old Volkswagens. If you've worked with me before, you know this is nothing new. That's me standing in front of my neighbour's camper in about 1986. Pretty cute. 30 years later, in 2016, I bought my first LVW, coincidentally the same year I started working on design systems. It was a 1971 Type 2 bus called Susie, and I absolutely loved this thing. Then I got a split-screen bus from Brazil, but unfortunately that relationship ended badly. And I don't want to talk about that one. So I picked up a Beetle that's currently in pieces in my garage, and now I have this lovely 1970 bay window bus. This one spent 40 years in San Francisco, but unfortunately had to leave due to the 4,000% rent increase caused by the tech industry. Yes, I have a problem, but why am I talking about this at a conference about design systems? Well, over the years, I started to notice similarities in the way these vehicles were designed and manufactured and what we were trying to achieve when building design systems. Yep. It helped me to frame how I think about the responsibilities of a design system team. Now, some of this is me post-rationalizing a system where there was no system to start with. But as this is actually the way many design systems are formed, I actually find it quite relevant. Before you have a system, you have a product. The first or flagship product defines the system, either intentionally or unintentionally. People in design system teams, generally speaking, don't start from nothing. For example, there was a 6-year gap between GovUK launching and an official design system going into beta. The job for the design system team was to understand the original intent behind a design, examine how it had been interpreted and flexed by the hundreds or thousands of people working on it, and create a cohesive system around that. We did not at any point want to change the design of GovUK. But let's not get too far off track from talking about VWs. The design of a Type 1 Volkswagen determined many of the principles and the design of the component parts that would be reused by all additional VW models for the next 30 or 40 years. This includes things like the engine and the gearbox, the slightly unconventional method of suspension, the construction, a body shell over a chassis and floor pan, literally of thousands of small parts that were made or selected by other suppliers, not to mention the iconic visual style, and of course the design of the production line and assembly process. But reuse is not yet a system. It's just starting with what you have and seeing if it works for something else. When I first found out VW engines were the same in a lot of vehicles, the design system brain in me thought, wow, they designed an engine that could be interchangeable between any vehicle in their fleet. In reality, much like any company you work at, the boss said, we already have an engine, put that in. Effectively, attempt to use everything you already have and only change it if it breaks. This is true of so many components across the early models. The headlights on a split-screen bus are literally the same unit as on a Beetle, they're just turned on their side. The iconic V-shape of the split screen created a visual nod to the Beetle's bonnet. So as much as this got me thinking about the potential of component reuse and having hooks in design language, it was really just the start. Where things get more reminiscent of design system work is what happened with the Beetle platform itself. This is where I believe the organization started to think less about reuse for reuse's sake and more about modular design for multiple products. This is what a Beetle looks like with its body shell removed. Rather than just being the bottom half of a car, it was recognized as having its own value. Because once you have a core platform, you can build other things on top of it, even if the audience is completely different. In the early 50s, VW wanted to create a showcase or halo model that would redefine their image and make their entire fleet appeal to a larger audience. While the Beetle was a true mass production car that was cheaper in both production and retail sense, the Karmann gear was intentionally higher end. It used more traditional methods of construction and intentionally steered away from fitting in with other vehicles in the VW fleet. However, the only real constraint that Karmann, who are a coach building company, and Gear, an Italian design house, gave themselves is that they used the Beetle platform. The Thing, or Trekker, was originally a military vehicle that became a popular alternative to a Jeep in the mid-70s. Now, these two cars are identical from a platform perspective. In fact, they are closer to each other than either is to a Beetle. This, for me, started to show the real power of platforms. Two cars, completely different audiences, two completely different price points and build processes, but fundamentally, the part that the user interacts with is the same. At its core idea, this is not too dissimilar from the concept of a base brand in a multi-brand design system. The platform is the base component, defining the HTML structure and the common properties. The shell is completely independent and adds brand-specific properties and style. Now, if they have access to it, other people can build on that core platform too. The New Zealand government and NHS were just two of the many organisations that forked the open source GovUK front-end code and the documentation website. We were able to give them what they described as a 5-year head start, something I know the team is very proud of. But anyway, we are getting off topic again. This is a Myers-Manx beach buggy. It's a fiberglass open-top shell built for the Beetle platform. This was a design that a Californian engineer, boat builder, and surfer called Bruce Myers came up with. He sold $500 kits that allowed people to convert their Beetle to a beach buggy at home. It eventually became a production vehicle for his company. The VW-looking Myers-Manx was the first ever kit car. It inspired hundreds of other beach buggy clones and launched the entire kit car industry. The Beetle platform was such a perfect design for building on. Home builders and small businesses used it to create cars that had no relationship to VW at all. Looking at it, you'd never believe this red sports car is actually sitting on one. I don't think it's very fast. But while I'm using this example as how great open source can be, Volkswagen were not receptive to aftermarket vehicle manufacturers and would not supply them these parts directly. These vehicles were almost exclusively made from the chassis of earlier Beetles that had been written off. But if you fast forward to modern day, platforms are really the basis for the design of all cars. This is the MQB platform introduced in 2012. It's modular and customizable. While the engine mounting and pedal position was fixed, all other elements were variable. This allowed this single platform to be used by over 60 models of vehicle in the Volkswagen Group. The new MEB platform, one that will support all electric vehicles, will have a much larger throw. Not only will it underpin every VW electric car, it's become a product in itself. Rather than rejecting other people using their platform, their desire appears to be for VW to become the platform supplier for all electric cars in general. This led to Ford and VW having a strategic alliance. The new Ford commercial vehicles will be using the VW platform, agreeing to purchase 1.2 million units. They collaborate on the platform, yet compete on the forecourt. That's because the savings from platform design are so huge. They're said to save 60% of development costs and reduce build time by 30%. So let's recap. The product defined the vision. The platform becomes the basis to build new products. Shared platform design, even between competitors, is recognized as the most efficient way to get a product to market. And brand differentiation happens on a layer above the platform. Does this sound familiar to you? Because it certainly did to me. I know what you're thinking. Is he going to stop talking about VWs now? This is because I started to feel a closer link between design systems, industrial design, and manufacturing. I thought this might help us define the boundaries of our system internally. This is because designing a concept of a car and designing a car to be manufactured are two very different jobs. And yes, I do feel the need to point out I know we're not designing cars. I'm talking about vision versus execution. Vision is about setting the purpose, defining a unique brand or product, and placing it in line with a target audience and other products in the same family. Execution is understanding how to realize that vision in a practical sense. For design system teams, one of these things is definitely us. The other, in my opinion, isn't. Here we have the initial sketches of the Type 2 commercial vehicle, followed by a scale model on the bottom left and a prototype on the bottom right. This was the vision of the automotive designers. But as it moves from vision to execution, the sketches get more detailed. For example, the design of every single seal or spring that makes up a steering column has to be considered in the design for independent manufacture. While the shape of the vehicle might be defined, someone has to work out how all the hundreds of separate panels fit together, using what joining method and in what order. While the vision of the Beetle's iconic shape was sketched and any prototypes built by hand, the industrial designers need to create bespoke tooling to press each section of the car from flat steel. Here you see the largest panel on a 70s Super Beetle stacked up and ready for assembly. They also needed to design a process for the parts to move around the factory in order to be assembled. If we relate this back to its equivalent in digital, I believe design system teams are the ones working out how the panels fit together, designing the tooling to allow the panels to be pressed, discovering how each major component has 100 smaller components inside of it, adapting the design for changes in regulations. Here on the bottom left, you see how the taillight design changed over 20 years, doing hundreds of hours of safety testing, and the same again in quality assurance. And not so much this. Automotive designers work a few years ahead, thinking about the next generations of vehicles. The boundaries of their work are clear and long established. Of course, this is not a direct translation to designing in digital, it just served as inspiration. To why I've drawn a line in the sand between design language and design system work. I know a few of you might be looking at me like this right now, so I have decided not to look up. I believe it can be beneficial to think of a design system team as the people that make the vision happen and not make the vision. I have a few reasons why I think that. Number one, in a lot of cases, developing a design language does not directly relate to what a design system team is here to do. Design language defines the energy and the feel of the experience, creates specific rules on high-level execution. The stakeholders in design language may include product and design, but it's fundamentally a digital brand exercise. The job of a design system is to give teams what they need to create usable, accessible, and inclusive experiences that follow the design language and principles. The stakeholders are primarily product and technology. Number two, time and scope creep. If the design system team are too involved in design language work, it will, without doubt, derail the team. We as design system teams are very much working in the now. We're often supporting the current version of the system and the people that use it. We're often working on things that will be unaffected by a change in design language. A new design language is about the future. The scope will change continually. Nothing will be set in stone. It might be best to be involved in a limited or an advisory capacity and carry on business as usual until that reaches a certain level of maturity. Number three, this is the one I'm going to have to apologize in advance for. Design system designers are often not the right people for the job. Just like I wouldn't expect the person that designed the tooling to make the Beetle roof to design the vision for the next car, I think we as design system experts think differently. What makes us good at our job can limit us in others. Again, this is personal experience, but designers hired into full-time design system teams are often the ones that are really strong on interaction design, defining component APIs and layers of design tokens. It's probably not what you needed at the vision stage of this type of work. Sometimes things come out looking like this. I really don't know what that is. It's like a submarine. Number four, what we build often needs to support multiple design languages. Multi-brand systems are getting more and more common. My last two jobs have been supporting 3 to 10 brands within the same system. When you're working in this way, you need to think very differently about everything. The design itself is abstract and unknown, so you need to design the system for any design language that comes your way. A new design language is just another brand. Number five, the separation of vision and execution means we can look at the vision more objectively. We're not as precious about the things that might need to be changed. And rather than debating the rationale over everything, our job might just be to understand how we break down that vision into understandable properties in the system in a way that probably only we can do. Just to be clear, this is a pro, not anti-design language position. I've personally seen the best outcomes when these responsibilities are split. Designers working on future design language should be able to look at the future unencumbered by existing processes, the same way automotive designers do. Having someone spend dedicated time on design language can fill the gap between what a branding agency might give you and what you ship in the design system. Because frankly, sometimes it's a big fucking gap. Now, there is a bit of a caveat here. So the reason I showed this slide earlier is because I think depending on where your organization sits on this spectrum actually impacts how much your team should be involved in design language work. To generalize slightly, there is more intentional industrialization of design happening on the I have to do this side of the scale, and more bespoke and unique experiences being created on the I want to do this side. If you're further towards the left, perhaps you've found less relevance in what I've said. The design language of your brands takes a bigger role in your design system because it's a bigger differentiator in your product or service. The reason I've leaned into this approach is that my experience have largely been on the have to do this end of the spectrum. The design systems I've been involved with have been far more about functional processes and patterns rather than expressions of identity. A good test of this spectrum is to consider if a user would bring up this product or service in conversation. For example, what did you do this weekend? I got a great deal on my broadband. I extended my overdraft or applied for a fishing license. Is usually not on the list. Now you remember earlier I said, this is why I've drawn a line in the sand between design language and design system work. What I really mean is new design language work. Design system involvement in design language work should be a gradual process. Here's a rough outline of how a new design language evolves and how much I believe the design system team should be involved at each stage. You'll notice by the end of this flow, we ultimately become the custodians of the new design language, the same way we are for existing brands. So who should be doing the work, and what is their remit? If a design language update is on the cards, the first thing you need is to get ahead of it. Reinstate the boundaries of your team to everyone involved. Understand in broad terms what the intent is. Is it a major uplift, major rebrand, or a minor uplift? Your involvement will vary significantly based on this. If you can, encourage the formation of a design language working group or a temporary team. This should include a design lead, someone to take responsibility for running the group, a representative from brand to make sure the design language doesn't go against the core principles of the brand, a few designers, a content designer, and maybe just one member of the design system team. While this group should be experimenting with things, it can be helpful to have someone to reinforce the scope of the work or call out, for example, things that could never be accessible before they go too far. It's also handy to have someone that can play back a sense of direction to the rest of the design system team. For example, knowing the design language is moving in a dramatically different direction is important to know so we can plan for it. You also need to be specific about the remit of what the design language group should define. The goal of the design language group should be to create a representation of the design vision, not too far into the realms of functional UI design. While it can use things like buttons and inputs as a way of expressing certain aspects about a design language, these should be considered as just that, an expression and not a specification. Things like size, states, interaction, and label positions on inputs should be determined at the point of integrating the vision into the design system. We then need to define the ongoing relationship. Make sure everyone is clear that ultimately the design system will become the custodians of the design language once this engagement is over. Depending on your organization, the group should potentially be disbanded until the next design language update. I must reiterate, these are the things that have worked for me and the teams I've been in. It's lessons learned from doing the opposite, being too involved. Making the wrong calls on this can ultimately lead to not releasing anything or not supporting existing users for 6 to 12 months. This isn't the level of service we aim to provide. I believe we are primarily here to support the now and simply help deliver the future. In summary, setting boundaries for design system teams is a good thing. A healthy tension between those who define the vision and execute it is a good thing. Owning a classic Volkswagen is mostly a good thing. So before we head to lunch, I'd just like to add this niche of a niche, this subset of design we've decided to work in is complex and forever changing. There is no right way to do this. The most important thing you can do is make the best decisions you can based on the organization and situation you are in. See ya.